Hey, this is Annex, and since I had a good response from my first tutorial, I thought I'd go ahead with the second one. And this one's also going to be about session view in Ableton Live. And just for the record, I use Ableton Live 10 Max, which is it gives you more options for live performance. But you can do the same thing with, I think, all the other versions of Ableton too. So I'll go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to show you how to make chords, how to use the note layout on the push, so how to look at these squares, these buttons, and transfer them to notes in your mind so you can play them as you would an instrument. I'll go over how to set up chords with those different notes according to the scale that you choose. And then I'll go over chord progressions, as you could make progressions in a pop song, something that sounds very easy and light and is in almost every song you hear nowadays. And then I'll go over how to make melody, so what goes over top of the chords. It's say if you hear a singer singing a song, she would be singing the melody. It's usually what your lead instrument is. And then I can go over how to make a harmony under that. So how to build different layers with instruments, so you have, at the end of the day, you have a really rich, timbre, however you say it, to go with. So first, I think you can see this okay here. So I have my Ableton here, and I loaded on, you can't see it here, but I have a contacts library that I really like. And here I loaded on it's the Alicia Keys VST. It has a nice piano sound. You can also just load on any of the instruments that come built in with Ableton. So just throw on a piano or whatever. And when I'm doing my chords and my melodies, I like to start with a piano because it's uncomplicated. If you start with an instrument like a saw or some sort of more complex waveform, then it gets a little tricky to find actually what the pitch is, and you're not set up right from the get-go. So I start with something really easy, and it's usually a piano, sometimes it's a violin, just so you're not distracted by the sound of the music when you should be focusing on the keys and the notes. Okay, if you didn't see my last tutorial, I went over the difference between arrangement view and session view, and I won't spend too much on that in this tutorial. I'll be mostly working in session view, but I'll go back and forth a little bit to arrangement view to show you how it looks in a way that more people are familiar with, so it helps you understand it that way. Okay, so this is a MIDI track. I have two MIDI tracks here. On the first one, I have a piano, and I'm actually going to get rid of this for now so it's not confusing. So I have this piano set up. I have my push 2 hardware that's set up as a input. So to take a step back, so here I'm in the preferences now in Ableton, and I don't need this audio inputs. So no input. I was going to set up my microphone with a broadcast decking for this, but I'm just going to keep it separate and not talk over my music this time. So the push 2 is a MIDI input, which means it doesn't send an audio signal. It just sends the electronic information about which note you're playing, and it feeds that into Ableton. And you can also use it as an output. Say when you play something on a clip in Ableton, it sends it back to the push. So then you would see the notes playing kind of by itself, like one of those old-timey pianos that you see in a saloon playing by itself. But that's not really that useful. So I use it as an input. And here we have the MIDI track. Yeah, you can see that. And the red box here. So the red box is what you see in the session view on your push. So you don't see anything here now because you don't have any clips. But we can start by making a clip. So I just double clicked in the first box here, and we see it appears in that top row. So again, this mirrors everything you see here. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's an 8 by 8 matrix. and you see 8 rows by 8, what would be 8 columns or 8 tracks on the top here, but I don't have those yet. Again, just briefly, the master track here, so this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you trigger those with what's actually it doubles as the repeat buttons on the right hand side in the right hand column from your clips here. And the reason why they have these different intervals on them is because you use them, they double as the repeat function. But I don't think I'll talk about that today, maybe another time. So you have your MIDI track, and I want to, the first thing I want to decide is what key do I want my song to be in. Let's do, say, A minor now, because it has all white keys. Not that makes a big difference right now. So then we decide, okay, we want A minor. I'll make a note of that here. And then I'll call it maybe chords. So I always start with figuring out what key I want and then what chords are in that scale that I want to use. When I go back to the push, so I don't know if you can see it here, so I open this and I go to notes. So there's this square here. You have repeat and accents on the bottom right hand side of your push. And then under that you have scale, layout, note, and session. So I'm gonna go in this tutorial between note and session. When I click notes, I see these. So this is like my piano, but instead of being laid out left to right, it's laid out in a matrix form. And when I want to go back to session view, if I want to see the clips, and if I want to trigger the clips, I click the session view that's beside the notes on this little box. So I'm going to go back to note now because we want to start making the chords. Let me make sure you can see that. Not really. Okay, that's better. So now we both see the same thing on our screen, hopefully. So I'm opening this track and I'm double clicking on this clip I just created by double clicking. It says it's playing now, you can stop. There's no information in it for it to play. The first thing you also want to do is make sure there's an instrument on your MIDI track. If you have no instruments, let me show you here. When you try to trigger something, it just shows you these yellow dots. So this one, I made a MIDI track. I added my instruments. It's in the contact library, but you can use anything else. And I open up this clip, and I say, okay, I'm in the scale of A minor, and I want to have some chords. So then I say, what are the chords I want to hear? First, I start with the root chord. So this is denoted by 1, or I guess the Roman numeral I is not 1. So I'm turning this back on. This little piano thing here means that the MIDI is in. So the monitor is receiving information from the push, from the hardware, all the time. You can also send it to auto, so it flips on and off depending on when you press the hardware, and if it's off, you don't hear anything. So I'm going to put it to in, and you also have to arm the track, so that's what this little red thing down here is. If the track is not armed, it's not going to be playing, so it's not going to know which track to send the MIDI information to. If you have more than one track, this makes a bigger difference. I don't set my MIDI channels specifically. With some things, like I have the Novation bass station, it's automatically set to, I think, MIDI channel 2 or something, so it gets a little trickier if I want to have multiple MIDI instruments, but in this case I don't. So this means any MIDI instrument I have set up, it will take my information from. Also, if I use my keyboard, like my computer keyboard, you can't see, it will also treat that as a MIDI instrument because we have this little yellow thing set up here. Okay, so what is the first chord in A? So we're going to get a triad, so that means 1, 3, and 5. So 1, let me turn this down a little bit. Unfortunately, it's really bright outside. Okay, so 1, 3, and 5. So what is 1? These purple squares here, they correspond to the root note. So because our root note is A, every one of these purple notes is going to be A. And some of them are the same, so let's figure out which ones. You can open up this piano roll and just zoom out a little bit by pressing on the left here and pulling to the left. So this takes the magnifying glass, as a zoom out. So when I press this, I see it turns red on C2. Okay, I actually didn't set my scale yet. So let's set the scale. This is a C and we want a scale of A. We're going to scale here. Oh, you can't see it. Anyway, there's a square on the bottom right. There's scale, layout, note, and session. We press scale. And on the top here, so see now it's in C major. I want to go A minor. So the A is over to the right of C. If you have the push in front of you, you can see it. So I press A with this button. So this is my A. And then I want to choose the type of scale. So instead of major, I want minor. And I just make one little turn with the top knob. And that's set. So I go back to, I press scale again. And then we see the device layout instead on the track. Okay, so we're on this track. And now when we press this purple note, this is going to be according to our scale. So the root note is A. When I press here, it's A2, meaning it's further in the bass. When you go A0, A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, it means you're moving up one scale or one set of, 8 or 12 notes every time you add a number. So this A1 is a really low A. This is A2, it's going to be one octave up. This is A3, one up from there, and A4 is again one up, and you can go further up as you want. To see more of the notes, so to see more of the clips, more of the notes in the scale here, you just press this octave. And again, you can't see it, but it's the bottom right here. So I'm pressing this octave button to go up and down to change this one octave lower or one octave higher. So now this is my A5. If I press this octave down once, it turns into my A4. And that way you can just set whichever kind of range of notes that you have your instrument playing in, because every instrument naturally goes over, it doesn't sound the best at all high and low ranges. So with the piano, it's more versatile and you can figure out your chords easier that way and then change the instrument when you want. So where am I going to start? Let's just start in, one up. So at A3 here. So this is your root note, this is A, and this is the purple that I'm playing. This is 1. So we want 1, 3, and 5 to get our triad in the scale of A. So these squares here, so this is obviously a matrix, and you have matrices within this matrix. So everyone is a box of 3 by 3. So this goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. So there's I had to check that there's 8 notes in this scale. There's each of the 8 notes in your scale going within this box. And it also goes from left to right and up. So I could also go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A this way. And that's the reason why you see when I press this A, this button here is also A. It's the same A here, the same A3, and it's the same for down here. And another option that you can do is using the chromatic layout. So if I go to scale here again, and see we have in key here, and in key means we're seeing only the notes that are literally in the key that we want to play in. So we don't see like A sharp or G sharp. We only see in this case, all the white notes, because those are the ones that are on the A minor scale. If I press chromatic, then the keys that are highlighted are the ones that are in the A scale, but you can also press the ones that aren't highlighted. So this one would be like G sharp and A. So if you want to make accidentals, you can play around with that, but I won't do that today. So we're in key and we're looking at the notes. So we have 1A, we want 3 in our triad, so A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, A, C, and then in the same way we want 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we have A, C, E, and that makes our first triad, and that makes our first chord that we're going to use. And yeah, like I mentioned, you have this is the same chord as this, and it gets easier to understand because you can look at different relationships between different chords within your scale in a different way. It kind of helps you think more openly about how they relate to each other. So this is your first triad in your A minor scale, 1, 3, 5. And a lot of pop music goes from 1 to 6. So then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We found our 6, and then we want to make a triad with our 6. And this triad is basically a little pyramid again. So we have A minor with the root note with A, and then we go A, B, C, D, E, F, which is the 6 notes in the A minor scale, and we make a triad again from it. And we refer to these triads always with what the root note of the triad is, but the root note is always going to be on the scale that you choose, if that makes sense. So we have the A minor, F minor, this is A, B, C, this is the third chord, so that already sounds nice probably. So this would be 1, 6, 3, and then you can already hear kind of where you want the next chord to be, so you have some sort of closure. Let me find that. Okay. So then it's 7. So we have 1, 6, 3, 7. And an easy way to remember if it's 7, it's just 1 before the root note, and you count the 8 notes in the scale. So again, this is 1, 6, 3, and 7. So now that we've figured out what we want our first progression of chords to be, we can record that. Here, I'm going to set the tempo that I want, and then I set the metronome, and the metronome makes it so that when I enter these keys, it actually lines up with the bars here, because yeah, all electronic music basically is in 4/4 time. It doesn't, these bars, yeah, they're divided into 4 sections, and a quarter note counts for a quarter of the section, if I'm not mistaken. So let's make a length of 4. This means it's 4 bars, and yeah, it's easy to break things up into 4, 8, 16, 32, and that's the only math you need basically. So we have this metronome set to quarter notes, and when I press play here, I hear that it's counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And when it does that 16 counts, we're going to be at the end of this bar of this 4 bar, what's going to be our 4 bar chords. So we're going to want to record in session view and to move that a little bit again, you can use this record button here. When you press this, when you're in session view, it records in a clip in the session, and when you're in arrangement view, it records the arrangement. So it just depends which view you're in for what it records. So let's get rid of this. Another thing is the count in. So I believe that is here. So this means that once I click this record, it's going to count in 1 bar for me, so I can get prepared and I can get the tempo right in my head before it starts actually recording. So I'm going to press the record here. And then I press the play again to stop it. And you see it recorded over these 4 bars, and it recorded the chord progression 1, 6, 3, and 7. And reading MIDI notes was a bit hard for me because I'd only played piano before, so it's a different way of thinking. You can also fold them here. So now you see this is like a piano roll. So if you took this this vertical column here, the black and white keys, and you flip them on their side like 90 degrees clockwise, you would get a piano. It's the same idea. Now what I want to do is, because this is great, but it doesn't really mean much to me because I don't really understand it yet, for example. So if you press this fold button, it gets rid of all the notes that you didn't just play. So all the notes that are not on that 4-chord progression in the key of A minor that I just recorded, they're not visible right now. They're still there, of course, because we didn't alter how a piano looks. They're just hidden. So because of the little bit of latency, and we don't press always exactly like a computer would right on the spot, we want to quantize this. And quantize means you bump it up or down to a certain increment, so it makes it more standardized. You can also add a groove, but that's the opposite of quantizing. So a groove would move it a little bit away from whatever time, whatever bar mark you wanted, and the quantize moves it closer. So here, because I'm doing 1 bars for each of these chord progressions, I'm going to quantize. You can use current grid. So the current grid I have, I think, is in 8th notes here. Okay. Let's change my grid. So this fixed grid down here, so I'm right clicking, and then under fixed grid, I want 1 bar. And here you see this, I think you see it. This 1/1, that means it's in 1 bar intervals, and what we had before was 1/8. So that means every one of these vertical lines here is a 8th note. But now every bar here is a whole note. So we want to select all of these. You can either like drag with your cursor, or you can go Control A like you're used to on the Windows computers, and it's probably similar for Mac. I think they probably have equivalent shortcuts. So let's select all of them, and then we right click, and we're going to click quantize. And in the quantize settings, I have adjusted to start and end. If you're doing a melody, sometimes it's better just to have adjusting to the start, because if you pull something to the end, then the note is going to be way more prolonged than you want it to be, and that's going to throw off the whole sound of your melody. But for now, we can just have start and end. Okay, so we have our MIDI set up in our key, we have our 4-chord progression, and let's see, make sure it plays back. For fun, we can go back to the session view and do this. So on the chord, I'm clicking session, that's beside notes on the boxes on the bottom right. And now I see here, this first column here mirrors what I'm seeing on the computer, and I can pull that down a little bit if we want to. The reason why these are red here is because it's armed. So this means that it's ready to record anything that you want as soon as you trigger it. And you can also trigger it from the push, which is nice, in the same way that you would press this round button to record. So like if I did this, this would be recording in the same way, for example, as if I pressed it on the push here. Whatever. So a lot of these things are like duplicates of each other, which is nice because it's not so overwhelming once you realize that. And you have different options of how to, yeah, find out what works for you in your workflow and what you want to accomplish with it. Yeah, so what was I doing? Okay, we have the chords. We want to play it back. So we're in our session view on the push, and I want to trigger this clip. So I just click up here, and we don't have any sound. Oh, that's because this MIDI from the monitor isn't in. So that means it's not going to be able to play back to you. It's only going to take the information in. But when I switch it to auto, it will then play what's saved in here. And you can probably hear that, okay, it's nice, but you would hear what the next set of 4 chord progressions would be, or what you want it to be, at least subconsciously. But I won't go over that yet today. So we have our chords. So now that we have these, I want to figure out what to do with them. So I want to put them on different instruments, and I want to make, say, a bass line first, because I think that's the best part. So we're going to right click here, and we're going to click on Insert MIDI Track, and we're going to throw some bass instrument on here. So I'll use the operator in Ableton. I think this isn't exclusive to the Max 10 Live. I think there's operator in the other versions too. So I'm going to go into bass and just choose, oh, this sounds nice. I'll choose this burned bass, whatever. And I'm going to pull the instrument onto the track here, and it loads it up like you see in the device view. Yeah, so you can play around with all these settings up here. So that's what you see that is controlled by the little knobs on your push. That's every one of these filters, cutoffs, whatever intervals, whatever options they are. You control these. And the nice thing about the push is that it's automatically mapped to the, when you use one of the native instruments in Ableton, it's automatically mapped to a lot of these knobs. So you don't have to go in and do it yourself. Although you can do that, it's a little bit of work. Like if you really have a MIDI instrument you like using, you can put the time and effort into doing that. But okay, so we have our bass here, and for the bass notes, we want to use the root note of each of these chords. Now my sound disappeared. Oh, so when I want to preview this, I'm going to click this little headphone in the top left, and then it will show me what each of these individual notes sound like. So I don't have to go back and play them again on my instrument to hear what they are. So for the bass notes, you want to use literally the bass notes of the chords. So I'm going to copy and paste this. I think there's a way to do this on the push, but I don't know yet. So I'm literally just going to go Control D for duplicate. You can also go Control C, Control V like you normally would on any Windows computer, or whatever the Mac equivalent of this is. Okay, so I copied that chord progression, and I'm just going to get rid of, ooh, that's awful. I'm just going to get rid of these top notes here first. And because it's supposed to be a bass instrument, these are way too high, because these 4, 5, 6 are on the right side of the piano, so those are more of the treble, higher frequency notes. So I'm going to move this down. So I'm going to go again, Control A, I'm going to select the MIDI notes here. And on my computer, I'm going to hold Shift and press the down key. That sounds better. So I press the down key 3 times and it moves it down 3 octaves. So let's fold that again. See here, it's from G0 to F1. So that's a much better range for where your bass instrument should be. And we can see what that sounds like. So we're going to turn off, if we played now, this clip would play because it has green already on it. But to stop that, we press the square down here. So we say stop. And we can also do the same on the push hardware by clicking any of the empty spaces below this. So like this would stop it on the next 1 bar count. I'm going to make that a 1/4 bar so it's less annoying. Again, yeah, this is the count in before when the trigger applies. So you can do that as long as the track isn't armed. If the track is armed, it starts recording something for you. But if it's armed, you're going to see that it is with the red here. So I'm going to get rid of that and then see what this sounds like. And I'll use my push for that. That's kind of an awful instrument. Anyway, it is what it is. So I won't spend time trying to fix that. And it's a bit hard to follow the melody. I like to remember where it's going because it's so slow, but I'll just keep it this tempo for now. Usually what I do, because the French chord is faster, so I'll work in 100 beats per minute or 120 beats per minute, and then I'll go up to 2 times that, so to like 200 to 240 beats per minute, and then I'll cut all of my notes. I'll divide them all by 2. So we have our bass here. If we go back to our notes, so we have to go down octaves to be able to see them. And we see them playing here. So we're going to see A, F, C, and G, because remember those were the roots of the triads we used. And I think we lost a bit of the window here. Okay, so we can take a step back now and see how that compares to the chords we have. So it's always nice to see how the layers are lining up with each other, especially when you get more complex melodies. Let's make this a different color. For my bass, I like to use green. So you assign track color to clips and it changes the color of all the clips here. So to see how they overlay atop of one another, this is a nice feature of session view that I recently found out. So you just select both of them. You can drag your cursor over both of them or do, Control C. If you have a lot of different clips and you only want to collect a couple, you can hold Control and just click the ones you want. If you want to select a whole range of them, you would hold Shift and drag your cursor. It's, again, the same idea as Excel would be, so working in cells, but here you're working in clips instead of cells. Okay, so we select both of those. The purple here, so this is showing you the first track, which is the chords, the setup we started with, and this green is showing you the bass, and I can see both of them this way, and I can also focus on one or the other by clicking at the top here on which color I want to see. And this is not so useful now, but it's useful when you have notes overlapping with each other and you can see exactly where they are, so one layer doesn't hide the other layer. So this is good for now. In theory, you want to have the least notes overlapping as possible, but if they are overlapping, you want to make sure they get out of each other's way, more or less, like you want to sidechain compress them or cut out the frequencies that they're overlapping with within EQ, usually. So this is okay because they're not overlapping, and we have a nice distribution. So it's nice to have like a full rich sound, meaning you have representation of notes in the scale from the low to the high parts of the scale. And this is why orchestras and symphonies sound so good, because they have a lot of different instruments. So for this, you'd have a lot of different tracks, if each instrument was a track, and they're all playing harmonious notes with each other. So they're not overlapping, and they all are in the same key and are complementary at the same time that they're played. So now that we have the bass, let's go ahead and do let's do like a middle chord or like a pad or something. So also what I like doing, you can control D to duplicate the tracks as well. This saves you time if you want to kind of keep the same instruments or keep the same contact library. You don't have to set it all up again. So I'll use a violin or something for here. And I like Session Strings Pro for this. Takes a second to load. Oh, you have to get rid of the other instrument on it. So this says MIDI channel 2. I want to go MIDI channel omni. I guess, I don't know, omnipresent. It just takes signals from everything, no matter what you play. It's okay if you have one or two hardware set up, but if you have a lot more, and if you have like complex like chains that you set up, then you want to actually go ahead and assign MIDI numbers to each of those, so it reduces your CPU. So this, we're going to go omni. I like to take the effects off, so I like to make the instruments that I use dry, because if you have multiple instruments with different reverbs on them, it's kind of like you're playing those instruments in different rooms from each other, and you lose a sense of consolidarity that you could have if you put the same reverb on all of them. So I took off the reverb here. I make my violins, this color of pink, assign tracks eclipse. And now that the reverb is off, I can use this reverb return track. So to send it to this return track, I'll use this slider here. This corresponds to return A, and B corresponds to return B. You can add more return tracks. I do this in my projects. I won't talk about that now though. Okay, so we have our new level. Let's call this bass. And let's call this pad, or like a mid or something. Okay, it's still called Alicia Keys, but it's not Alicia Keys because I changed the instrument on that. So we have to arm if we're on our, so if you're using the push, whatever you press here should be armed, but it doesn't really work that well. I mean, and I know it's not just my computer and my setup, it usually doesn't respond that well to that. But in theory, like how it's made, it should it should arm the track that you press at the top. Anyway, so we're working with this pad and this mid. Let's get rid of, let's keep that for now actually. And we can go to notes. And we don't hear anything. Okay. So remember, if you trust your setup enough, it's not your fault that you're not hearing anything here. It just means you have to move up octaves. So because violins can't play in those lower notes that we had bass playing at, we have to shift them up, say 1 or 2 octaves. I'm going to work here in the a 3-ish range, so kind of in the mid. That's why I call this mid for the middle frequencies, whereas bass would be the lower frequencies. So we know for the bass, we already have A, F, C, and G, but we have them at lower octaves. So we can see how this sounds just as it is. Oh. So the in and out also sometimes disappears if you pull it out, if you push this up too much. So if you don't see, just pull down this part. So it sounds, yeah, fine, but it's a little busy and we want to add more different instruments to get a more, yeah, symphonic feel. So you could take the easy way out and just keep the same roots, just the same. This was 1, 6, 3, 7. Oh, I'm working up here. But that's a bit boring. So let's take them out because we know we already used those in the bass. Let's take out the top two and reserve that for the melody, which we'll do in a second, and see how that sounds. So it already sounds a little more interesting. And see, now here, I'm not going in and working with the push yet, but I could be. So this is more to explain to you how it looks first in the session view, but then also how you can use the matrix to make progressions on the chord. Okay, that's fine, whatever. Let's make another one for the melody, and I'm gonna Control D again to duplicate this. And I'm gonna rename it Control R, that opens up the top here. And I'm gonna call it like highs or something. You can also rename these clips in the same way. Control R is a shortcut. And let's make this blue. Let's have another nice thing on it. I use Omnisphere a lot. I think it's really gorgeous. So let's add that on. Especially for the choral samples, like the human voices, they go in and they record actual choirs singing and people singing. So it's really lifelike because it is directly recorded from life. It's not a synthesizer. Move this over again. Okay, we have Omnisphere. I'm gonna go to human voices. And boys choir is a nice one. And again, I'm going to take off that reverb. I'm just going to dry it out so nothing gets messy. Reverb is tricky to deal with because it can really make your stuff sound muddy without you realizing it, especially when you add more and more instruments. So this is armed already. You see it's red here. Let's see how this sounds if we play across. Let's take those chords off. So I'm going to turn this first, this kind of guiding track that we started with, I'm going to turn this off so we won't hear it. So when I go into the session view and I trigger everything on the first row, I'm using this button here to trigger it. That's fine, but it's a bit boring. And these are also overlapping. So I'm selecting them, I'm dragging my mouse across in the same way, and I see, oh no, they're directly on top of each other. And when the waveform is like that, it makes really big peaks because anytime both waveforms are positive, it accentuates both of them at the same time. So at the high frequencies, it can be dangerous when you have like a lot of frequency jamming because it's really excited at the high end. So let's fix this. We're gonna unfold. And then we're going to remember, okay, which we saved that top line in the chords for this. So what was that? This was E, C, G, and D because we already used these two notes of the chord, one for the bass and one for the mids. So we're going to go E, C, G, and D. You can also just copy this in again, so copy your guiding chords back in again, and then just get rid of the bottom here. And I'm going to move those up 1 octave, just for fun. and it gives a little more space with each of the instruments. So I control A, or I select them all, and then I hold shift and I press, oh God, I press up. Oh, that's terrible. Okay, I'm gonna take it down, and I'm gonna take this mid down one level. Again, so they're not overlapping. Let's see if I select all of these here and fold, then we see the same chord, so the same 1, 6, 3, 7, just with different instruments and different different parts of the octaves and the scales. So these are the same notes as we saw here, they're just pulled apart and being played by different things. So this is what we want to see. We want to see it separated, but harmonious, meaning it's in the complementary setup in each of these 4 bars. Let's see how that sounds. I'll press the session trigger. That sounds good, but it's stupidly slow. So you could do 2 things. You could keep this to 120 and divide these by 2, or you could put this up to 240 and it's the same effect. Because I think most of you don't make French chord. I'll divide these by 2 so we keep an appropriate BPM for you. So I'm going to select all of these and clip this, whatever :2 is. And I'm just going to do the same here. And the same again here. So now when we play it, you can kind of follow a little better where it's going. I'm also going to make the bars have the length have the length. So I'm just pulling over with my mouse. These top arrows, I'm pulling them from the right to the left to shorten the bar that we're playing. So this is the same as if I pull this length up or down here. This over here is the same effect. So let's just do 2 bars. And the same for this one. Oh. Okay, so the last thing we want to do, so this sounds good, but we want to have a melody. And the melody is what goes on top, as I mentioned before. And this is where the push can come in. So I'm going back to note now on the push. I'm focusing on my high ends to make my melody. So where am I here? So when this plays, let's just stop the other ones now and see how it looks when it's playing on the push. So we're going to click play here. And you see the green that it's showing you on the push are actually the notes that it's playing. So the notes are E, C, G, and D. And again, we know because we can count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And it gets easier once you do it more to remember how it works. So because we don't want to just have, now it's half bar notes over half bar notes, let's make the melody. Let's do something fun first and divide these by 2 again. And I want to go quarter notes now. And we can go quantize and bring on the other layers too. We can do something like triplets. And this creates a type of polymeter. So actually, when you're working with triplets, it can be equivalent to working in 3/4 instead of 4/4 time. And when you layer a part with 3/4 over 4/4, it's complementary as long as you go to bars that are increments of 12. So because you want to have a common denominator, and 3/4 and 4/4 become the same every 12 bars. You can also change that here, but I won't talk about that today. So we're working in triplets. So you want to make each of these a triplet. So I'm going Control D again, and I'm doing that twice and just pulling the notes over. And because it doesn't sound very interesting to have all the notes the same length, we're going to select the last two notes of every triplet here, and we're going to pull down the velocity. And when you're working with the push, this accent button, you can't see it, but you see where my finger is, so it's right to the right of the repeat button. This accent determines whether or not the push is going to record what you press, like which notes you trigger with velocity, and the velocity is what makes the volume. It's what you see down here. So the higher the red thing up here, the higher the, I don't know, velocity meter, the louder the note is going to be. So this E is the loudest possible according to velocity. And if we decrease it here, you see velocity is decreasing also on the bottom of the window here. It becomes a lot quieter. Okay, so that already sounds a little more natural and a little more interesting. Let's go and make a melody like I'm mentioning. So I'm gonna forget about this one for now, and I'm gonna go back into the note view on my push. Also still focusing on this high instrument, and we're gonna turn this off, and we're just gonna play around a little bit. So this is, I think, what the push was intended to be used for more, so to be experimental and to actually get into the music more in a way that you can't so well if you're just staring at your computer screen for hours on end. So this gets you a little more in touch with how the sound actually is created and how it feels and what you want to shape for it. So I'm just going to play, remember this one is off, I'm just going to play these first two. And then while those are playing, I'm going to just do fun stuff with the melody. So remember, all of these buttons we press, all of these keys are on the correct note scale. So these are all in A minor, so we can't go too wrong. So I'm going to play these and then just figure out what sounds good. And once I figure out what sounds good, so notice I'm not going to be recording. This is a new feature in Ableton 10, I think. I can press this button and it'll capture the last few bars that I played. So this helps you improvise and have a more creative session without feeling trapped in a recording box. Okay, so say I really liked that random thing that I did last. You can press this up here. And Ableton is going to make its best guess about how many bars back it wants you to capture. So it captures like a really long way back. It's tracking everything you do as long as this is armed and as long as you're still playing it. So you can take it back as far as you want. Again, once you record something, it's not going to be exactly on the beat, so you can go in and quantize it. For a lot of things I do, so I'll be playing like quarter notes and then like a third, a triplet note at the same time, so I can't go in and quantize it all like this, because it'll make my triplet notes into something that's on a quarter interval, and that's not what I want. So yeah, once the melodies get a little more complex, you have to go in a bit more carefully, but then you'll also get better about putting the notes on the right time. So it ends up being the same pretty much. So I recorded this. It's when you use the push, this is handy. So you see on the left side, what I did would have been the same as if I pressed this record button. So I'm holding this and I'm pressing new. but yeah, it doesn't have anything in its brain again. Let's do that again. So we're just gonna press record here. It counts us in. So I say I love that, it's the favorite thing ever. I've played it in, then I'm going to hold this record button and I'm going to press new at the same time. And then it captures what I did. And this empty space is the time from when the recording started to when I actually started playing. So we can get rid of that and adjust it a little and play it back to see if it's the thing you actually want. And you say, okay, that's the part I remember wanting. If you only wanted the last half of this, you just pull this bar over here. And if you quantize, so this is selected, right click and quantize to the, yeah, you can do it to the current grid, I believe. Yeah, so we're in current grid, so it's quantizing to 8th notes, which is good because some of the notes I played were 8th notes. If we're quantizing to say quarter notes, then it's going to pull those 8th notes way too long, and that's not what I intended to do when I played it. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to talk about. That went on a little longer than I thought it would. So yeah, we learned how to choose a scale that you want, how to set the scale on the push, as how to set up your chords in a simple chord progression. So here we use the chord progression denoted by 1, 6, oh, let's turn that back on. 1, 6, 3, 7, because it corresponds to the first, the 6th, the 3rd, and the 7th note in the A minor scale. And once we have our chords down, we made a bass instrument, so we copied them out, we made a new MIDI track, we put on an instrument here, and we just basically took the bottom, the root note of each of these 4 triads. And we moved them down because, of course, a bass instrument is in the bass clef, the lower frequency ranges. Then we wanted a middle layer, so again we made a new track. It's a MIDI track. We kept our piano on here. We copied those chords over, and this time we kept the middle notes here in each of the triads. And again, these are higher than the bass, so they don't overlap, and we check to see if they overlap by selecting both of these clips. And the last thing we did, again, we made a new MIDI track. We added the instrument to it. I like a nice choral instrument for the high ends. We copied over the chords again. And here we kept the top level of the chords. So this was the, here we go back, E, C, G, and D. We moved them up an octave because we want it in the higher frequencies. And we started to play around with how this sounds first if you play it just straight as one bar, and if you divide it by 2, if you make triplets, and we played with the velocity too. A reason why I don't use the velocity so often on the push is that it gets really quiet, and I have to slam the buttons really hard to get it to respond. You can set up in the, yeah, I think it's in, yeah, setup, so top right here, you do have options to change the pad sensitivity and the gain, and that'll influence how it records the velocity with respect to how hard you push. But I don't really do that. Okay, so we found the melodic line, and then we said, okay, we're gonna go in and do something more creative with the push, so we went from the session view to the note view. We have a matrix here. We remember that the root notes are in blue, so these are all A. And every note you press here is in the correct scale. So every note here is going to sound good as a melody when you play it with these other layers, because these are also in A minor. So we recorded something out, we quantized it, and we listened to it all together again. yeah, so this is just an introduction of how you can work with that. Yeah, here we would want to shorten this and loop it. And this is also, so here I want to take a final look at how these line up. So I'm pressing this first clip here, and then I'm holding the control button on my keyboard. And I select these other two. I can pull it up here. And then we see how everything's aligning up. So we have three pretty colors, nothing's overlapping. They're all complementary and they're all different instruments. And it can also do this, so I think your MIDI clips have to be at the same increments more or less. So one could be on a 2-bar loop, one could be in a 4-bar loop. It'll just show you how these cross over for the, whatever the common loop distance is, length is. But they do have to be looped for it to understand how to do that. Yeah, so when we go back into those chords, we notice some notes on the harmony aren't really lining up because they're not these top 3 notes anymore. But that's okay because we're not using this chord progression as just a standard piano anymore. So I hope you enjoyed this quite long tutorial. I hope I didn't bore you. Yeah, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. And if you want to learn anything else, maybe I can also teach you it depending on what it is. So yeah, also let me know that in the comments. Thanks.